The federal judicial process, well, when it comes to resolving tax disputes in the federal judicial system, taxpayers have three court options to choose from. You see them here. Most of the time, the burden of proof falls on the taxpayer, meaning the taxpayer must be the one to provide that sufficient evidence to support their claims and dispute the IRS's audit findings. So it's up to you to argue your case. It's not up to the IRS to make the case themselves. Here are the three court options for taxpayers, which are the courts of original jurisdiction or trial courts for matters in which a taxpayer would first bring a lawsuit against the IRS. This is the first step. We've got these first courts, but then if we disagree with any of those, we can go to these two other courts. So that's something we'll see in a second. But step one is you choose one of these three courts. Now, how do you choose these courts? Well, they've got different attributes, and it just depends. Just like what entity should we create? Should we create a C Corp, an S Corp? Obviously, this is something we'll see later down the line in the exam. Should we be a sole proprietorship, partnership? That's making a decision. There's pros and cons to each. Also, what kind of trust should we make? Should we make a simple or complex trust? Again, something you'll see later down the line. So two, what court should we choose? Well, there's pros and cons to each. We'll kind of run through the criteria for each and the attributes of each. The U.S. Tax Court. This court specializes in hearing only tax cases. So again, these are all things to memorize, be familiar with. This is the only forum in which taxpayers may litigate without having first paid the disputed tax in full, which, hey, that's a big pro. You can actually argue your case and you don't have to pay the tax in full first, whereas in these other cases, you need to pay the tax and then you argue your case. Big difference. Taxpayers do not have to pay the disputed tax liability prior to filing a petition. Trials are conducted by a judge. There's no jury involved, so that's another thing to consider. Maybe you feel that you can appeal your case to a jury, which is your fellow taxpayers, and maybe you feel that the jury will be more understanding of you rather than a judge. I can't say, I've never interacted in that capacity before, but in that case, if you feel that a judge might be better for you, then there'll be another reason to choose the U.S. Tax Court. Decisions can either be regular, which means involving a new or unusual point of law, or memorandum related to the application of existing law. So this is a very interesting point, right? Because when it comes to disputing tax situations, if I wanted to dispute the fact that I wanted to deduct some, let's say, expenses for my business, with the amount of people in this country, odds are someone's already disputed that. So that's generally why a lot of cases are not going to get that far. But if, let's say, I'm going to use, the example of cryptocurrency. I mean, when that started out, that was an absolute mess in terms of taxing it. Yeah, that was a new or unusual point of law, or maybe applying the existing law for how you buy and sell securities or buy and sell assets. That is kind of what's going on here. So it would be a lot more likely to take a dispute about, let's say, the taxation of cryptocurrency to the courts than it would be to take to the courts disputes on my just normal deductions from my business. Because, well, guess what? People have had businesses before and they've taken deductions, and the IRS has disputed against that before. Whereas, again, like something like cutting edge, where probably not many people have gone through it before, that's going to be dealing with something more significant the IRS will have to fight against. Next, we've got the U.S. District Courts. Wow, I am just messing up butchering these words. Taxpayers must pay the disputed tax liability before suing the IRS for a refund. That's an attribute there. This court offers the option of a trial by judge or jury. Now, if a judge is chosen, there's only one judge, not a panel of judges. Just all these points could be multiple choice questions. Could be a sim where you have to pick the correct tax court based on the criteria. And the U.S. District Courts hear a variety of federal cases, not just tax disputes. Again, just memorize that for the exam, but in reality, in real life, how does that affect anything? Well, it's basically just, in your case, maybe you want to appeal to people who don't just hear tax cases. Why would you do that? I don't know. I can't say I've ever thought about bringing a case against the IRS. Lastly, here we've got the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. So again, these are the three courts you would go to first. This court does not offer jury trials. They're only heard by a judge. Again, you also have to pay the disputed tax liability before filing a claim. The Court of Federal Claims hears various types of claims against the United States, including tax disputes, so a lot of similarities to the U.S. District Courts. Lastly, the Court of Federal Claims follows the decisions of the Federal Court of Appeals. So we'll see the Court of Appeals down here. Again, that's another difference. So it basically falls in line with whatever the Court of Appeals is saying. Again, something to just keep in mind, something to mark down. Now, if a taxpayer disagrees, we've got some beef, we've got some issues. We disagree with the decision made in any of these courts, they can appeal the ruling to a higher court. In this country, we've got different tiers, different rankings of courts. And then obviously the Supreme Court is the supreme law of the land. You theoretically could go and argue to the argue to the Supreme Court about something, but in reality, is your case going to get to the Supreme Court? Probably not. Your odds are your tax case is not that important that it's going to change the fundamental law and structure of the U.S. So, but technically that is there, and there have been many tax cases that have got. I mean, not every year, but many tax cases throughout the past decade that have gotten all the way to the Supreme Court because they are so important. But not to go too much down the line of history there. The Court of Appeals, this court hears appeals from both the U.S. Tax Court and U.S. District Court cases. So we see, okay, you disputed here, you don't agree, you can go to the Court of Appeals. The relevant circuit court of appeals will handle the case depending on the taxpayer's location. We've got different courts, and you could memorize where they are. That's not important for the exam. Which specific court will you go to? Will you go to a court in California, New York? Again, that's not really something we'll worry about. Lastly here, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. This court is going to hear appeals from the U.S. Court of Federal Claims cases. So if you go 1 or 2 and you want to appeal, you go to 1 here. You go through number 3 here, the U.S. Court of Federal Claims, and you want to appeal, you go to number 2 here. That's just kind of how that works. Yeah, that is our legal system with a lot of courts. Let's keep powering along. Got a few more slides. Keep up the energy, keep up the focus. You got this. Now, when taxpayers and the IRS cannot find a resolution to a tax dispute through administrative channels, the conflict must be resolved within the federal court system. Now, this is doing the appeals process, and if we can't find something to agree upon there, we go to the courts. This legal process can be initiated by either the taxpayer or the IRS, and the taxpayer has the option to select the most advantageous path. So we saw if you choose certain courts, it goes to various appellate courts. So you have the ability to choose your most advantageous path. You'd probably consult a tax lawyer and ask them, hey, in my case, which would be the most advantageous path? Key aspects of the federal judicial process for tax law and IRS audits include, the responsibility to prove. We kind of talked about that a little bit. We'll dive into that more here. Generally, the party initiating the lawsuit has the responsibility to provide evidence supporting their case. In most tax-related cases, the taxpayer carries this responsibility. However, under certain conditions, the IRS takes on the burden of proof. This can happen when the taxpayer presents credible evidence and adheres to the IRS record-keeping requirements and requests. So if you're following the rules by the book, you're doing everything you should be, maybe it's going to be up to the IRS to prove that you did something wrong rather than you to defend yourself. We've got the principle of stare decisis. We've got many good old Latin words throughout this entire course, throughout Reg, and I'd say the ones I bring up, just memorize, be familiar with them, especially when we get to business law. There's going to be a lot. And the reason we mention England a lot is because our court system, our law of the land, it dates all the way back. If any of you are familiar with the Magna Carta, gosh, I'm surprised I'm talking about all this history here during the exam. But what is tax law, but if not built upon history? So we've got laws came from England, was set up in the 13 colonies. U.S. became a country. It adopted most of those rules. It's something that it's just good background knowledge to know. All of the law there was set up for the foundation of our legal system. Legal decisions are frequently shaped by judicial rulings. So stare decisis, basically, the rules that we use for our law were set by some judge in the past. But again, it's defined by our past. Many laws that we follow, whether you like them or not, were initiated by some sort of judge or the rulings by those judges. When it comes to, for example, prohibition, dealing with banning all alcohol, that was a decision made by a judge in a court, and boom, Supreme Court decided no more alcohol, and then the Constitution was amended. The principle of stare decisis requires judges to respect precedents set by previous judicial decisions that dealt with a similar set of facts. This practice promotes consistency and predictability within the system. Yeah, and if there's something that maybe that was 20 years ago and it's outdated, judge can revisit it if things have changed. That's how the legal system works. Am I saying it's perfect? Am I, saying it's flawed? I am not here to debate that. I am here to just tell you what you need to know for the exam so you can move along, get your CPA bonus, and enjoy life. Now let's talk about potential appeal outcomes. The outcome of an appeal can take several forms. The appellate court might agree with, or affirm, or overturn, also known as reversing, the lower court's decision, or it could send the case back to the lower court for further examination. Another term here for that would be to remand it. Appellate courts, the courts you appeal at, focus on reviewing the lower court's trial record to assess whether the correct law was applied in reaching the decision. Not every court is perfect. These are all people. People are quite fallible. Myself included. It's uncommon for an appellate court to question the lower court's factual determinations. All right, let's wrap up this slide here. We've got a few more. In summary, the federal judicial process for addressing tax law disputes and IRS audits is comprised of a multi-level court system, as we saw on the prior slide. The trial courts include the U.S. Tax Court, District, and Federal Court of Federal Claims. Make sure you know those with their criteria. While the appellate courts consist of the U.S. Court of Appeals, Federal Court of Appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court. Each court level plays a critical role in resolving disagreements between taxpayers and the IRS, ensuring fair and consistent application of tax laws. Sounds good to me. It's a lot, but we'll get through it together, right? Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.